Welcome to Silmarillion chat number 11, in which we finish the Quenta Silmarillion, the tale of the Silmarils themselves. We'll have the Calabeth, our Calabet, and of the Rings of Power in the Third Age yet to come. We're finishing with chapters 22 to 24, and I'll go through, discuss them. These chapters are of the Ruin of Doriath, of Tuor and the Fall of Gondolin, and of the Voyage of Earendil and the War of Wrath. This is a really interesting section structurally and historically in terms of the writing, and I think it's worth, I'll mention some points on that to start with. One is that these three chapters were alone of the whole Quenta, not significantly revised in the 1950s. There were some inline revisions, but there wasn't rewriting, which there was for every other chapter, including the Ainul and Dale and the Val of Quenta. There is also the fact that the Ruin of Doriath is something that Christopher Tolkien more or less says uniquely. He talks about this in the History of Middle-earth when talking about the textual state, more or less that he wrote the chapter. That doesn't actually mean he wrote the words in terms of he decided this is what would happen, he decided this is how it would sound, and this was the beautiful phrase. What he means is that his editorial choices were quite significant, and he did write linking text and pick amongst the potential details you could have in the account in a way that was much more decisive in how we read it than in how Tolkien wrote it. So, and that, those are interesting points, and they're interesting, I think, for this reason. It's interesting not because Tolkien thought that the chapters were in a perfect state and everything else was bad, but because we don't really know what his revision was likely to have been. What I mean is that he had rewritten the rest, and he almost certainly, Christopher Tolkien thinks this, come to revise these decisive chapters, but they are so dependent on everything else that they depended on a stable state everywhere else. And so as Tolkien was revising, of course he was going to revise these chapters last. They include one of the great tales and another that is often, one of the lays of Beleriand. The tale of Lay of Earendil is the small lesser lay, and the Fall of Gondolin. The Fall of Gondolin goes back to 1916 in the trenches, pretty much. It's one of the oldest stories and one of the most important. So there is a lot riding on this conclusion, and he obviously was leaving it. I think this is Chris Tolkien's view for a stable state elsewhere. That never happened. The 50s revision gives us most of the current Quenta and the mythological prehistory. But it doesn't give us a final state of everything else, and the revisions in the 60s and early 70s were very uncertain, and include pretty obviously blind alleys that he was looking at, like, maybe the world could never have been flat. It always had to be round, because of course our world has always been round, and that's how subcreation works, and I think that's an obvious blind alley. So Tolkien never really came to conclusions about some of the development of the Quenta. More or less, as long as it matched mostly what we had in the Lord of the Rings, he would have been happy with what he ended up with, whereas we have to have a kind of, we need, if we're going to read it as a book, we need a stable text, and so Chris Tolkien makes decisions about it that lead to that. What we have is really interesting. It's a whistle-stop tour. You have to assume that if Tolkien had returned to it, you would see a large expansion. The comparison is that Beren and Luthien and Tuor and Turambar are both, that are 29 and 26 pages, or 26 and 29 pages respectively, and there are other chapters which are 20 pages. Here, each of these Doriath is 11 pages, Gondolin is 8 pages, Earendil War of Wrath is 11 pages. You're talking about quite short chapters comparatively, particularly Tuor on the Fall of Gondolin, which is it definitely feels much too compressed. But then you think it was from an older state of the text, from the 1930 text that he returned to when he was looking at publishing Lord of the Rings, and said, I've also got this idea. These things would have seen large expansions. The Fall of Gondolin, perhaps most obviously, and the Ruin of Doriath would have also come to a stable state. The Ruin of Doriath has almost 3 separate sections in it, really, and so they could have been separate chapters at 10 pages each. Tuor on the Fall of Gondolin similarly. There's also an interesting thing that the War of Wrath takes 40 or 50 years, but is barely mentioned. And it's barely mentioned because it's no longer the tale of the Silmarils and the rebellion of the Noldor, but of how the Valar and their various allies tidy up after those elves in Middle-earth. of course, much as the rebellion brought salvation, we'll get to this, but much as the rebellion brought salvation to the Sindar, who were not rebels, the War of Wrath brings salvation to anyone remaining. So none of that would have happened without the rebellion, and so you have this the eucatastrophe of Tolkien at the end. But we'll start with the ruin of Doriath, which is that basically, so ends the tale of Tuor and Turambar, but Morgoth did not sleep nor rest from evil when his dealings with the House of Hador were not yet ended. This actually gets expanded a bit in a way that isn't in the published materials, but is in History of Middle-earth. In the Wanderings of Hurin, there are a few more things that we hear Hurin do. But anyway, here, Hurin is unhappy. No one trusts him, really, because he's escaped from Angband. The Easterlings don't attack him when he goes back to his own land, for the remnant of his own people shunned him. Hurin is embittered, and he says to Hurin that he might as well go, because he was moved by pity for an enemy utterly defeated. This is, of course, a lie. He tries to blame Thingol and Melian for what's happened to his family, and Hurin becomes bitterer and bitterer, and he wants to go to Gondolin. And it's interesting, at this point, you get a thing where Thorondor sees him and says to Turgon, please let him in. He's coming looking for us, he's shouting. There are a few evils accomplished by this, or involved in this. One, Turgon's paranoia, and Turgon's desire to... He's the High King of the Noldor. He wants to maintain his monument of Tyrion upon Tuna, even though he knows that salvation will only come from the west, and he's always been, along with Finrod, the wisest in that regard. He has become worried that things will go wrong, and he wants to preserve it, and he doesn't initially let Hurin in. Hurin, of course, is shouting for him, which means that Morgoth knows roughly where Gondolin is. That is a great evil. Hurin then leaves, which is itself a great evil accomplished, because he wanders elsewhere, and more things happen. He goes and manages to find... he goes to Brethiel, and there's some more stuff, I think, in the Wanderings of Hurin about this, but they let him through because they're terrified of this ghost they think has arrived. And he goes to the burning of Glaurung, and he finds the burial place of his children, and he finds a woman there who is old, full of fear. The light still gleamed in her eyes that long ago had earned for her the name Elethwen, proudest and most beautiful of mortal women in the days of old. You come at last, she said. I have waited too long. It was a dark road. I have come as I could, he answered. But you are too late, said Morwen. They are lost. I know it, but you are not. But Morwen said, almost. I am spent. I shall go with the sun. Now little time is left. If you know, tell me. How did she find him? But Hurin did not answer, and they sat beside the stone and did not speak again. And when the sun went down, Morwen sighed and clasped his hand and was still, and Hurin knew that she had died. He looked down at her in the twilight, and it seemed to him that the lines of grief and cruel hardship were smoothed away. She was not conquered, he said, and closed her eyes and sat unmoving beside her as the night drew down. This is actually, I think, one of the most powerful things in the tale of Hurin, that Morwen is unconquered, but also that she doesn't get a happy ending, but she gets to be with her husband and hold his hand as she dies. Is the only member of the clan of Hurin, in fact, who gets that some sort of closure, some sort of clean ending. And then I think of when the lines of care are smoothed away, of Aragorn saying to the effect of, we go in grief but not despair, beyond the circles of the world where there are more than memory, that humans go to Eru in some way, in a mystery that isn't revealed to the Valar, and there is more than memory there, there is more than earthly hope there. And he buries Morwen, and it's said that the stone was not cast down in the destruction of Beleriand. It remained above the water. Presumably it was pushed up. Hurin then goes to Nargothrond and finds that it's broken. The doors of Felagund are broken. Glaringer's gone and been slain. Now Mim the petty dwarf has come there, and this is providence, if you like, because of course this is someone who Húrin really wants to see. After an exchange, of course, Húrin slays Mim, and it's not unknown to is it to me by whom the dragon helm of Dor-lómin was betrayed. And Mim says that we delve these caves, we live here, and then that's when Húrin says, no, I know who you really are. You betrayed my son. Mim begs for his life, but there is no mercy forthcoming. And he stays for a while, where the treasures of Valinor lay strewn upon the floor in darkness and decay. These beautiful things have ended in ruin. Earthly things cannot last. And he only leaves with one item, however, we're told. And he goes to King Thingol in the Thousand Caves, because he's captured and taken. And then he's fine with that, he wants to go. And Thingol greets him fairly, showed him honour. Húrin casts the Nauglamir, the necklace of the dwarves, before him, made for Finrod by the craftsmen of Nogrod and Belagost. And he says, receive thou thy fee for the fair keeping of my children and my wife, for this is the Nauglamir, whose name is known to many among elves and men. I bring it to thee out of the darkness of Nargothrond, where Finrod thy kinsman left it behind him when he set forth with Beren son of Barahir to fulfil the errand of Thingol of Doriath. Thingol is filled with pity, and so restrains his wrath and endures Húrin's scorn. There's something high and noble about that, for all Thingol's many faults. He doesn't strike Húrin down for this insult when Thingol did nothing wrong. Melian, however, after a time, speaks and opens Húrin's eyes. Long was Tuor thy son fostered in the halls of Menegroth, and shown love and honour as the son of the king. Basically, you see through Morgoth's eyes. It was not by the king's will nor by mine that he never came back to Doriath. Your wife and daughter were here, we looked after them, we didn't want them to go. With the voice of Morgoth thou dost now upbraid thy friends. And Húrin's eyes are cleared, and he tastes at last the fullness of woe that was measured for him by Morgoth Bauglir. And he spoke no more of what was past, but stooping lifted up the Nauglamir, he then gives it again, and says, receive now, Lord, the necklace of the dwarves as a gift from one who has nothing, and as a memorial of Húrin of Dor-lómin. For now my fate is fulfilled, and the purpose of Morgoth achieved, but I am his thrall no longer. And it's said that he goes and casts himself into the Western Sea, and so ended the mightiest of the warriors of mortal men. Húrin seems, one supposes, to be defeated, and certainly more evil is being accomplished through this. And really the only takeaway, that's one story, by the way. The wanderings of Húrin would have been their own chapter, I think we can conclude, with more disasters befalling people in this Kalevala saga of tragedy and woe. Of course, even with this, a big thing here is that Húrin has introduced a pistol into Doriath, a Chekhov's gun, and he has given away the general location of Gondolin. So Húrin is the instrument of Morgoth discovering or having a chance to see destroyed the two last great strongholds outside of the Falas of the elves. Thingol with the Nauglamir, his thoughts turn unceasingly to the Jewel of Feanor, and they become bound to it. It is not a coincidence. It's interesting because it is a recurrent thing, and it's something one shouldn't see as a lazy trope in Tolkien, to state the obvious. But there's obviously something interesting going on that Tolkien repeatedly has the idea of these beautiful objects in some way, these bits of jewellery, tie men's hearts up. And in some cases there is very active evil magic. That's the case with the ring. In other cases it's different magic, and it's not as obviously evil. The Silmarils capture the light of the trees. They are the most beautiful thing on earth. The Arkenstone, which sounds a lot like a Silmaril when it is described, I don't take it to be. I suppose it literally could be, but I'd be pretty certain it's not. I think we have no reason to think it is from anything else. But it's just a pretty stone, basically, that light has its own light. It's the heart of a mountain, and it has its own light. It maybe is, kind of a living, almost a living spirit in some way, a nature spirit. But these items, because remember, the Arkenstone tempts Bilbo, and that's probably not due to the effect of the ring. And the Silmaril tempts Thingol. He is not under the curse of Feanor, under the oath, but there we are. Now, the dwarves still travel, even in these dark days. They still travel across Thargelion to Doriath. They still come, but they come in large companies so that they're safe against any raiding orcs. And the dwarves look upon the work of their fathers. They behold with wonder the shining jewel of Feanor, because he says, oh, why don't you put it in the Nauglamir for me? And they're filled with great lust to possess them, including the Silmaril, and carry them off to their far homes in the mountains. But they dissemble their mind, consent to the task. And then they, in the moment when they're about to give it to Thingol, they say, by what right do you lay claim to the Nauglamir? It's come to him but by the hand of Hurin, the man of Dor Loman. He took it as a thief out of the darkness of Nargothrond. Thingol understands what's going on, and in his wrath and pride he gave no heed to his peril, and speaks to them in scorn. How do you of uncouth race dare to demand aught of me, Elu Thingol, lord of Beleriand, whose life began by the waters of Curvaenan, and years uncounted ere the fathers of the stunted people awoke? And standing tall and proud among them, he bade them with shameful words be gone unrequited out of Doriath. And so the dwarves attack him. This is a great disaster, and it's caused by both their greeds. If Thingol had never demanded the Silmaril, this wouldn't have happened. If Thingol had not wanted to be proud of the Silmaril and mount it in the Nauglamir, the dwarves would never have seen it. If Thingol had just chosen to give up and give way to them on this, then perhaps there might have been, he would have survived a bit longer, though shamed by that. But he's slain. So they died in the deep places of Menegroth, Elfwë Singollo, king of Doriath, who alone of all the children of Iluvatar was joined with one of the Aina, and he alone of the Forsaken Elves had seen the light of the trees of Valinor, with his last sight gazed upon the Silmaril. That's a cinematic moment, isn't it? The dwarves then go out, but tidings went swiftly through the forest. Few of the company come over Arras, and the Nauglamir is retaken and brought back to Melian. And the survivors come and tell those in Nogrod, which is where they're from in this case, it's of Belegost that the Azagul dies at the Nerneath. Nogrod is mostly associated with this. And the dwarves of Nogrod are furious, because they're being lied to, of course, but they're furious about their fallen kin, and they call for, it's told they asked for aid for Belegost, but it was denied them. And the dwarves of Belegost sought to dissuade them from their purpose, but their counsel was unavailing, and ere long a great host goes forth from Nogrod, and crossing over Galion marched westward through Beleriand. So you have, you've got a situation where dwarves and the kind of native love for created things, beautiful things that dwarves have, which is greed, is not the greed of the dragon, though it becomes a dragon greed. This is a point made in The Hobbit, which casts lots of light on the Silmarillion if you want it to pay attention to it. I think another example which I didn't pick up was that there's an instance of the dragon gaze with Bilbo, of course, and Smaug, which is relevant to Tuor and Turambar. But I think that there is a thing where dwarves love things for their beauty and for their practicality. The dragon has no use for the things that it collects. It's merely what we call, in Deadly Sins terms, greed. But the dwarf can end up in the same kind of place where he loves the thing for its good qualities, but loves it so much that he would do harm to others. And we've got an example of that here, that the dwarves of Nogrod so desperately want this thing that though their cousins tell them not to, they go anyway. Melian is very sad, and she took upon herself the form of the elder children. So this is an important thing I don't think was mentioned before. She's an elf. She's not actually an elf, but she takes the form of an elf. And in that union she became bound by the chain and trammels of the flesh of Arda. In that form she brought him Luthien to Nuviel. In that form she gained the power of the substance of Arda, and by the girdle of Melian was Doriath defended. But now Thingol lay dead, and his spirit had passed the halls of Mandos, and with his death a change came upon Melian. And so her power is withdrawn. The girdle is lifted. She speaks only to Mablung, bidding him take heed to the Silmaril and to send word speedily to Beren and Luthien in Osiriand. And she vanished out of the Middle Earth, and passed to the land of the Valar beyond the western sea to muse upon her sorrows in the garden of Lorien, whence she came. And this tale speaks of her no more. And so the Naugrim arrive with Doriath unprotected in large extent, and Mablung falls defending the doors of the treasury. So we've now lost Beleg, slain accidentally by Tuor, and Mablung, the other great captain of Doriath we've followed, and the Silmaril was taken. We then hear of... We return to Beren and Luthien. This is something where you could almost have another chapter here, but you could associate it with the Fall of Doriath at least. Beren and Luthien dwell in Tol Galen. They have a son, Dior. He marries Nimloth, kinswoman of Celeborn. So either that may mean sister, I suppose, or it may mean cousin or whatever. But so similarly, she is Celeborn is Prince of Doriath here. So remember, Eol, father of Maeglim, husband of Arathel, and Celeborn are both kinsmen of Elu, of Thingol, and Nimloth is kinswoman of Celeborn. This is the royalty of royalty. The Sindar are great, and they are the great amongst them. And Dior and Nimloth have sons, Elred and Elerin, and a daughter, Elwing. In some versions, I believe there's another son too. Elwing is star spray, for she was born on a night of stars, whose light glittered in the spray of the waterfall of Lanthir Lamath beside her father's house. Now word went swiftly among the elves of Assyrian that a great host of dwarves had come out of the mountains and passed over Gelion, and a messenger comes from Doriath saying that it's fallen. And Beren arose and went to Tol Galen, and summoning to him Dior his son, they went north to the river Asgar, and with them went many of the green elves of Assyrian. Beren has plainly become a lord amongst the green elves. We know the sons of Feanor, I guess, have possibly become almost lords there. You know, they have, along with their surviving people, many of them have fled there, and they've previously found help amongst the green elves. But now it seems that Beren is able to command, essentially, at least voluntarily command respect. And the dwarves of Nogrod with diminished hosts are coming back east to Sarnathrad, and then they are attacked. And they have so much treasure that they are struggling to escape. Many dwarves are slain, and they climb the long slopes up beneath where they live in Mount Dolmed. And the shepherds of the trees emerge, and they drove the dwarves into the shadowy woods of Ered Lindon, whence it is said came never one to climb the high passes that led to their homes. The dwarves are war criminals. They are not kinslayers, but they have done terrible things. They have attacked without cause, and they have almost certainly slain the innocent, as they slain Thingol, who was innocent. And the shepherds of the trees, of course, here are Yavanna's Ents. They join Beren and the Green Elves in destroying these criminals. In the Battle of Sarnathrad, Beren fought his last fight and himself slew the Lord of Nogrod and wrested from him the necklace of the dwarves. Very different. The Lord of Nogrod dies at Beren's hands, having committed great evil, whereas Azagul of Belagos dies a hero, almost unmatched, unparalleled in the story of the dwarves. The Lord of Nogrod curses the treasure. Then Beren gazed in wonder on the self-same jewel of Feanor that he had cut from Morgoth's iron crown, now shining set amid gold and gems by the cunning of the dwarves, and he washed it clean of blood in the waters of the river. When all was finished, the treasure of Doriath was drowned in the river Asgar, and from that time the river was named anew Rathloriel, the Golden Bed. But Beren took the Nauglamir and returned to Tol Galen. Little did it ease the grief of Luthien to learn the Lord of Nogrod was slain, and many dwarves beside. But it is said and sung that Luthien, wearing that necklace and that immortal jewel, was the vision of greatest beauty and glory that had ever been outside the realm of Valinor. And for a little while the land of the dead that live became like a vision of the land of the Valar, and no place has been so fair, so fruitful, or so filled with light. A good is accomplished out of this. Beren and Luthien, there's no indication there's a greed in them in that. It's a beautiful thing that they won. That they wouldn't hold back from the Valar. No suggestion whatsoever of that. But they make a beautiful, wonderful place from the fact that Luthien, with the light of Valinor upon her chest, is a life-giving thing, which is very different from the way the Silmaril works in the hands of the greedy, or seems to work. Dior goes to rule in Menegroth at Doriath, and they go with their children. And the Sindar received them with joy, and they arose from the darkness of their grief And Dior Elukil set himself to raise anew the glory of the kingdom of Doriath. Yeah, that's an interesting thing that, again, you definitely see an expansion there, I think, in a later revision. But that Dior goes to try to rebuild things, you might think it foolish, but he's not under the curse of the Noldor. He is not a Noldor. He has no Noldor blood in him. He just wants to make a good place where his grandparents made a good place. He is sometime later told that his parents have died. Gives the king a coffer with an Nauglamir, and Dior knows it's a sign that Beren and Luthien had died indeed and gone where go the race of men to a fate beyond the world. Long did Dior gaze upon the Silmaril which his father and mother had brought beyond hope out of the terror of Morgoth, and his grief was great that death had come upon them so soon. But the wise have said the Silmaril hastened their end, for the flame of the beauty of Luthien as she wore it was too bright for mortal lands. Again, not a criticism of Luthien, but something about the fact the Silmaril doesn't really belong here. The Silmarils are not for mortals, they're not for Middle-earth. And now Dior arose, and about his neck he clasped a Nauglamir, and now he appeared as the fairest of all the children of the world, of threefold race, of Edain and of the Eldar and of the Maiar of the Blessed Realm. Rumour goes round, though, saying that a Silmaril burns again in the woods of Doriath, and the oath of the sons of Fëanor was waked again from sleep. For a while, Luthien, this is actually one of the most interesting lines in the whole book to me. But yeah, so the point is that Dior, we have no reason to think he's actively as basically greedy or foolish as Thingol. But these items are, the Silmarils are not for mortal use. Basically, they're not for Middle Earth, and there is a great curse upon them. But now this rumor runs that it's happening. The sons of Fëanor are woken again from sleep, essentially. For while Luthien wore the necklace of the dwarves, no elf would dare assail her. But now, hearing of the rule of Doriath and of Dior's pride, the seven gathered again from wandering, and they sent him to claim their own. How interesting that the one thing that stays the curse of Fëanor, the oath of Fëanor, is that Luthien Tenuviel wears the Silmaril. No one dares. And you could say, oh, is it because she's so powerful, she's got amazing magic? Well, yeah, sure she does, but that's not why. It's because there's something so holy and precious about Luthien that even the sons of Fëanor, even Celegorm and Curufin and Caranthir, the absolute nightmares of that group, will not go and attack her. The brothers demand it, and the brothers and their allies go for an assault upon Doriath. They fight come the middle of winter and fought with Dior in the Thousand Caves. There fell Celegorm by Dior's hand, and there fell Curufin and dark Caranthir, but Dior was slain also, and Nimloth his wife, and the cruel servants of Celegorm seized his young sons and left them to starve in the forest. Of this Maethros indeed repented and sought for them long in the woods of Doriath, but his search was unavailing, and the fate of Ellared and Ellerin no tale tells. Thus Doriath was destroyed and never rose again. But the sons of Fëanor gained not what they sought, for a remnant of the people fled before them, and with them was Elwing Dior's daughter, and they escaped, and bearing with them the Silmaril, they came in time to the mouths of Sirion by the sea. Now, this is so packed, isn't it, with information? But a thing here is we see the sons of Fëanor begin to fall one by one as their corruption increases, and this is a point I made. My Phoenix 5 comparison is that the bad sons of Fëanor go first. Celegorm and Curufin, who try to cause chaos with Luthien and in Nargothrond. Caranthir, who is the most temperamental and difficult of them all. They die. Dior slays them, but they destroy stuff. And Celegorm's servants commit even worse than that, because they actively choose to... they don't just kill people in combat in a way that is wicked, because it's kinslaying, but they actively attempt to murder children. And though Maethros, the best of them, does not want this, it happens anyway, and he cannot call back his brother's servants and their deed. But they don't get the Silmaril, do they? Elwing takes it, and they go to the mouths of Sirion. We then turn to Tuor and the Fall of Gondolin. Tuor is fostered by Anael of the Grey Elves in Mithrim, and the elves choose to leave and go to the havens of Sirion because of the evil around them because this is Tuor is born posthumously to Ryan after the Noniath and Odiad, after Tuor dies. And so Tuor, for 16 years, lives with the Grey Elves. They then choose to evacuate, but are attacked by orcs and easterlings, and Tuor is enslaved. Tuor eventually escapes, and he lives as an outlaw. So he's parallel to his cousin Turin. Ulmo talks to him, though, and chooses him as the instrument of his design, sets in his heart to depart from the land of his fathers. And whether or not this is actively talking that Tuor knows about, whether it's sort of just music of water, who knows. But he eventually comes to the gate of the Noldor in the west, and a tunnel, and escapes Hithlum and gets towards the sea. And he comes into Nevrast and looks upon Belegar, and he's enamoured of the great sea, and he hears the music of Ulmo, and so he dwells in Nevrast alone as the doom of Nargothrond drew near. So we're given a point of context, which, you know, is not unimportant, and we see these things beginning to cross over more and more. We have Hurin and Turin interlock with Doriath and the Silmarils, and therefore Beren as well. You have a chapter with Hurin and Beren in it. Here you also have one of the parents of Elrond and Elros come into it. Elwing leads the people, survives the Doriath away. He eventually comes that when he sees some swans flying south, he knows it as a sign that he had tarried over long, and so he finds Vinyamar, and found there the shield and hauberk and sword and helm that Turgon had left there by the command of Ulmo long before he went to Gondolin. And he arrayed himself in those arms and went down to the shore. And he meets Ulmo, who comes up out of the storm and speaks to Tuor. There are some good pictures of this, but this great sea-foam god, and he gives him a cloak, a great cloak, to mantle him in shadow from the eyes of his enemies. The next morning, though, Tuor comes upon an elf there as well, Voronwe, son of Oranwe of Gondolin, who sailed in the last ship that Turgon sent into the west. But when the ship returning at last foundered, Ulmo took him up, alone with all the mariners, and cast him onto the land near Vinyamar. And learning of the command laid upon Tuor by the Lord of Waters, Voronwe was filled with wonder, and did not refuse him guidance to the hidden door of Gondolin. So Tuor is going to Gondolin, where his father and his uncle once went. And Ulmo has arranged things that of the sailors to the west, Turgon's desire to seek aid is going to provide salvation. One part of the salvation comes through the very fact that he is willing to send the mariners earlier. And so Voronwe goes and survives and is there for Tuor, and they come through the fell winter. They look with grief as they travel south on the defilement wrought by the passage of Glaurung. But even as they gazed upon it, they saw one bear going northward in haste, and he was a tall man, clad in black, and bearing a sword. But they knew not what he was, nor anything of what had befallen in the south, and he passed them by, and they said no word. They see Turin going to his doom. Again, the stories interlock. This is something where the stories are always interlocked, but Tolkien is intentionally bringing the great threads together with the great characters of his stories. And so with their cloak from Ulmo, they arrive at the hidden door of Gondolin. They come up, and Tuor looked down upon the fair vale of Tumladen, set as a green jewel amid the encircling hills, and he saw afar off, upon the rocky height of Amon Gwareth, Gondolin the Great, city of 7 names, whose fame and glory is mightiest in song of all dwellings of the elves in the hitherland. Trumpets are blown, and Tuor rides across, and he comes, and he is brought to the tower of the king, and looks upon the images of the tree of Valinor, and he meets Turgon hiking of the Noldor, and upon the king's right hand there stood Maeglin his sister son, upon his left hand Idril Celebrind. All that heard the voice of Tuor marvelled, doubting that this were in truth a man of mortal race, for his words were the words of the Lord of Waters that came to him in that hour. There is a common theme with the 3 great younger heroes, I guess. I mean, one is actually the same age as Hurin and Huor, I guess. But Beren, Turin, and Tuor, who are the key human heroes of the 3 great lays, all are presented as the elves perceive them almost as superhuman. Turin is almost one of the Noldor, and the elves are unable to defy him, and his enemies are unable to stand before him in a way that is very much elven. Tuor, because he is a prophet, not because of his own things, though he's very brave, he seems more than a human. Beleriand, Thingol eventually grants, must be something more than a human. This is partly because elves cannot recognise that the short-lived, often foolish and evil humans, there's something else going on and possible because they're immortal souls, I think. And Turgon ponders the counsel of Ulmo, love not too well the work of thy hands and the device of thy heart, and remember that the true hope of the Noldor lieth in the west, and cometh from the sea. But Turgon was become proud, and Gondolin as beautiful as the memory of elven Tyrion, and he trusted still in its secret and impregnable strength, though even a Valar should gainsay it. And after the Nirnaeth and Odiad, the people of the city decided never again to mingle in the woes of men and elves without, nor to return through dread and danger into the west. And so Turgon has, though he is a wise man, though he in various ways has helped and will help accomplish the salvation of Middle-earth, much like his cousin Finrod did by aiding Beren in the quest of the Silmaril, Turgon is nonetheless, he has created something so amazing, and he possibly, this is something that comes to with Finrod saying, I'll never marry again. His beloved died in the crossing of the Helcaraxe. I'll never marry again because my doom is not that. He knows that he has other duties and that perhaps he'd be distracted by those family responsibilities. Turgon has built something and he wants it to last, and he is not able to give it up for the sake of... Basically, the warning from Ulmo is to bid Turgon depart and abandon the fair and mighty city that he built and go down Syria into the sea. And Turgon could then be perhaps the representative who goes into the west in some way, but it doesn't happen. Maeglin speaks against Tuor, and because that's what Turgon wants, he listens to Maeglin. And at last he rejected the bidding of Ulmo and refused his counsel. But in the warning of the Valar, he heard again the words that were spoken before the departing Noldor on the coast of Araman long ago, and the fear of treason was wakened in Turgon's heart. And so they block up their exits. This is obviously what stops Hurin, I guess, from getting in. And thereafter none went ever forth from Gondolin on any errand of peace and war while the city stood. Thorondir brings news. He talks about the slaying of Thingol of Dior his heir, the fall of Nargothrond. But Turgon shut his ears towards the woe without, and vowed to march never at the side of any son of Fëanor, and his people forbade ever to pass the leaguer of the hills. Tuor stays there. He's happy. He becomes mighty amongst the elves. Idril loves him. Maeglin hates him. Because Maeglin wants his true inheritance. He wants to be a king. He's the son of a prince. He's the son of a princess. He is, as far as he's concerned, his uncle's heir. But he can't do anything to really stop Tuor. And Tuor marries Idril. For though he would not, Turgon would not be the bidding of Ulmo, he perceived the fate of the Noldor was well with the one whom Ulmo had sent, and he did not forget the words that Huor spoke to him before the host of Gondolin. Out of us shall come salvation, he says. They have a feast. Maeglin is angry, though secretly there came to pass the second union of men and elves. And they have a son the year after, Earendil Half-Elven, 500 years and 3 since the coming of the Noldor to Middle-earth. Of surpassing beauty was Earendil, for a light was in his face as the light of heaven, and he had the beauty and wisdom of the Eldar, and the strength and hardihood of the men of old, and the sea spoke ever in his ear and heart, even as with Tuor his father. Gondolin is full of joy, but Idril knows something bad is coming. When Earendil was still young, Maeglin was lost. He's mining. He leads the miners of the elves, and they break the king's law and go beyond the League of the Hills. This is one thing, is that Maeglin is not here attempting to betray anyone when he does this, but he is rebelling against his king's orders. And because Morgoth knows where Gondolin is, his armies there and take Maeglin prisoner. Maeglin was no weakling or craven, but the torment wherewith he was threatened cowed his spirit, and he purchased his life and freedom by revealing to Morgoth the very place of Gondolin, and the ways whereby it might be found and assailed. And Maeglin is sent back, and he's promised Idril. He's promised Gondolin and Idril. And so this leads Maeglin more easily to treachery. The most infamous in all the histories of the Elder Days. Maeglin is a tragic figure. There's a parallel, and it's not an unfair parallel to draw in some ways to Hurin and Turin, particularly Turin. People who destroy the things around them that they love. But it's different. Turin never betrays anyone. Accidents happen, bad things happen, but in the end, Tuorin is not conquered by Morgoth. He is simply broken and destroyed, which is different. Whereas Maeglin is conquered and prefers darkness to light. And then there's the fall of Earendil, when the fall of Gondolin when Earendil is 7. We're told much is told in the Fall of Gondolin. We obviously don't have a full published version of that. We have various, apart from the comparative texts in the Fall of Gondolin, the more recent book. But we have several versions thereof. We do hear of Ecthelion of the Fountain slaying Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, and being slain by him. The defence of the Tower of Turgon by the people of his household, until the tower was overthrown, and mighty was its fall, and the fall of Turgon and its ruin. Turgon's last stand is a famous thing. Tuor does many great deeds. But yes, there are too many dragons, too many wolves, too many Balrogs, particularly led by Gothmog. Tuor rescues Idril. Maeglin has kidnapped her and Earendil, though, and Tuor finally slays Maeglin. And Tuor and Idril led such remnants of the people of Gondolin as they could gather, and of that passage, through the secret passage that Idril has prepared, the captains of Angband know nothing, and basically the burning of Gondolin actually covers, the smoke and steam covers the escape. And they're trying to escape, and orcs and a Balrog manage to catch them because they're waiting for survivors. And their Glorfindel, chief of the House of the Golden Flower of Gondolin, slew him. Slays the Balrog on a pinnacle of rock. But the Eagles, that still wouldn't save the survivors. They're not a military company, they're just civilians, a few soldiers led by Tuor and by Glorfindel, I guess. Glorfindel, who will be sent again, this is Tolkien's conclusion, is that he will be uniquely sent from the halls of Mandos amongst all elves to aid the elves and men in the Third Age, and will, of course, stand against the Ringwraiths to save the hobbits as they arrive at Rivendell. And the Eagles come to help, though, and so the orcs still don't get their prey, because Thorondor and the Eagles come to help Tuor. The Heralds of Manwë always help those who are advancing the great cause of salvation. Manwë is not unmerciful. He doesn't want to screw the people of Middle-earth over. Thorondor bears up Glorfindel's body. They bury him, and the barrenness becomes green turf with yellow flowers. That does not change until the world was changed. As so often, hallowed ground is a real thing in Middle-earth. And so they too come to the Land of Willows, Nan Tathran, near the mouths of Sirion, where Ulmo can help protect them. And they made a feast in memory of Gondolin, of the elves that had perished there, the maidens and the wives and the warriors of the king. And for Glorfindel the beloved, many were the songs they sang, under the willows of Nan Tathran in the waning of the year. There Tuor made a song for Earendil, his son, concerning the coming of Ulmo. And the sea longing wakes in Tuor's heart. Therefore Idril and Tuor departed from Nan Tathran and went southwards down the river to the sea, and they dwelt there by the mouths of Sirion, and joined their people to the company of Elwing Dior's people, and had fled thither but a little while before. And when the tidings came to Balar, the Isle of Balar, of the fall of Gondolin and the death of Turgon, Irainian Gilgalad, son of Fingon, was named High King of the Noldor and Middle-earth. Because at this point, barring the sons of Feanor, who had already given up the kingship, of course, but have now doubly disqualified themselves with the second kinslaying. They refuse to learn not to do that, basically, to put it in an almost silly way. They refuse to learn from their mistakes. At this point, Fingon is dead, Turgon is dead, Maeglin is dead, who was counted as a prince, Finrod is dead, Fingolfin is dead, Feanor is dead, Orodreth is dead, Angrod and Egnor are dead. So the only male heir of the third generation of the Noldor is Gilgalad. There is a one of the fourth generation, Earendil, albeit by the female line, much like Maeglin, or I guess Celebrian later. Findulis is dead as well. The other fourth generation Noldor is Celebrimbor, who is not disqualified in the same way as his fathers, but obviously as his father and his uncles, but does lose the heirdom on the same basis. They are the dispossessed. Morgoth thought his triumph was fulfilled, recking little of the sons of Fëanor of their oath, which had harmed him never and turned always to his mightiest aid. And in his black thought he laughed, regretting not the one Silmaril he had lost, for by it he deemed the last shred of the people of the Eldar should vanish from Middle-earth and trouble it no more. If he knew of the dwelling by the waters of Sirion, he gave no sign, biding his time in waiting upon the working of oath and lie. Yet by Sirion and the sea there grew up an elven folk, the gleanings of Doriath and Gondolin. And from Balar the mariners of Círdan came among them, and they took to the waves and the building of ships, dwelling ever nigh to the coasts of Arvernian under the shadow of Ulmo's hand. And it is said in that time that Ulmo came and he pleads for the elves. But Manwë moved not, and of the counsel of his heart what tale shall tell? The wise have said the hour is not yet come, and only one speaking in person for the cause of both elves and men, pleading for pardon on their misdeeds and pity on their woe, might move the councils of the powers. And the oath of Fëanor perhaps even Manwë could not loose, until it found its end, and the sons of Fëanor relinquished the Silmarils upon which they had laid their ruthless claim. For the light which lit the Silmarils the Valar themselves had made. Then Tuor and Idril make a ship, sea wing, and they sail off into the sunset. But in after days it was sung that Tuor alone of mortal men was numbered among the elder race, and was joined with the Noldor whom he loved, and his fate is sundered from the fate of men. That's interesting as well. There's no reason why Tuor would become an elf. We're talking about magic here, you know, we're talking about the mysteries of the judgment of the gods. And here we simply have that Tuor is such a great sailor, and there's something so special in his heart, essentially, that he disappears, and maybe he dies a mortal death, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he comes in some way to Aman. One point to make off that before we end in the final chapter is that Tolkien is saying, when he says Morgoth thought his victory was accomplished and the loss of one Silmaril was worth it, because he doesn't really get the value of the Silmarils anyway, the big point here is he thinks that the destruction of Doriath and the destruction of Gondolin works for his triumph. The destruction of Doriath and the destruction of Gondolin do not work for his triumph. They work for his doom. Because the point was that Thingol clinging to the Silmaril and Turgon clinging to Gondolin, the picture of Tyrion upon Tuna, these are things which slow the defeat of Morgoth. They do not hasten it. Whereas the destruction of those places, tragic and horrific as they are, as those destructions are, as sad the deeds of the dwarves of Nogrod and of the sons of Fëanor and of Maeglin, who of course participates in a kinslaying, is not numbered among the kinslayers, but he does slay his kin. He is cursed by the Noldor in that sense, but also by his kind of unpleasant, greedy father. The destruction of these things leads to Elwing and Earendil joining under the rulership, I guess, of Elwing and Tuor originally in the havens at Sirion, and they ally with the sea elves of the surviving sea elves under Círdan, who live on the Isle of Balar, and this creates a new people, the gleanings of Gondolin and of Doriath, and there is a final merger of the different strands of Sindar, the different survivors, because Gondolin takes in survivors from other cities after the Nerneath. The people of Fingon go there, for instance, I think. The Noldor, so more or less the remnants of the Noldor and the Sindar and free men and the Falathrim are all together. And out of that will come, and the Silmaril is with them. The loss of the Silmaril is vital as well. All these things have come together in the providence of Eru and will lead to the destruction of Morgoth, of the Voyage of Earendil and the War of Wrath. Now, Earendil is the lord of the people that got nigh to Sirion's mouths, and he took to wife Elwing the Fair, and they have Elrond and Elros the Half-Elven. Earendil could not rest. Two purposes in his heart blended as one. He sought to sail thereon, seeking after his parents, and find perhaps the last shore, and bring ere he died the message of elves and men to the Valar in the west, that should move their heart to pity for the sorrow of Middle-earth. And Earendil is fast in friendship with Círdan, and he builds a ship with Círdan called Vingalot, Foam Flower, fairest of the ships of song. Lots of alliteration. Golden were its oars, white its timbers, very Saxon phrasing there. Hewn in the birchwoods of Nimbrathil, and its sails were as the argent moon. In the lay of Earendil is many a thing sung of his adventures, but Elwing was not with him, and she sat in sorrow by the mouth of Sirion. So Earendil goes around finding out everything about the world. He doesn't find his parents, he doesn't find Valinor. He's defeated by shadows in the Sea of Shadows, driven by repelling winds, until in longing for Elwing he turned homeward, and his heart bade him haste, for a sudden fear had fallen on him out of wings. Now, he wants to go home because he has a premonition of evil. The premonition of evil is that tidings have come to Maethros that Elwing yet lived and dwelt in possession of the Silmaril. And he, repenting of the deeds in Doriath, withheld his hand. Maethros is the best of the brothers, and this is both his glory and his greatest curse. He leads them. You can imagine he, of all the brothers, wouldn't just be scared of the sanctity of Luthien, but would love Luthien, and therefore would not attack her. He repents of Celegorm's people's evil deeds, abandoning and potentially thereby murdering Elwing's brothers, Ellared and Ellarin. He repents of what happens in Doriath, much as he repented, though he did not cause it, of the burning of the ships, and he doesn't want to do it. But in time, the knowledge of their oath unfulfilled returned to torment him and his brothers, and gathering from their wandering hunting paths, they sent messages to the havens of friendship, and yet a stern demand. And then Elwing and the people of Sirion would not yield the duel which Beleriand had won and Luthien had worn, and for which Dior the Fair was slain, and least of all why Earendil their lord was on the sea, for it seems to them that in the Silmaril are the healing and the blessing that had come upon their houses and their ships. And so there came to pass the last and cruellest of the slayings of elf by elf, and that was the third of the great wrongs achieved by the accursed oath. For the sons of Fëanor that yet lived came down suddenly upon the exiles of Gondolin and the remnant of Doriath and destroyed them. In that battle some of their people stood aside, and some few rebelled and were slain upon the other part, aiding Elwing against their own lords, for such was the sorrow and confusion in the hearts of the Eldar in those days. Even the people of Fëanor have become sick of the oath. The brothers are sick of the oath, but now the feudatories have chosen to rebel, and they aid Elwing. And you can imagine it, can't you? You can imagine, particularly maybe amongst the host of Maethros, who has probably attracted the best and noblest of the sons of Fëanor and the people of Fëanor, come and join with the ruined houses of Fingon and of Turgon and of Doriath. Amrod and Amras are slain, but Maethros and Maglor win the day. They survive. Too late the ships of Círdan and Gil-galad come hasting to the aid of the elves of Sirion, and Elwing was gone and her sons. Then such few of that people as did not perish joined themselves to Gil-galad and went to Balar, and Elros and Earendil are captive. Elwing, with the Silmaril upon her breast, has thrown herself into the sea. So Maethros and Maglor don't get the duel. Ulmo saves Elwing. Ulmo is interfering all the time. He doesn't really care. He's gone off reservation. He's just like, yeah, Manwë said that they're doomed. What would happen if I just poked this and did this? She becomes a great white bird, a swan, I guess. And upon her breast, there's shining the Silmaril. And Eärendil's looking for her, and eventually sees her. She falls from the sky and turns back to the form of Elwing and sleeps. So they are reunited on Vingalot. Great was the sorrow of Eärendil and Elwing for the ruin of the havens of Sirion and the captivity of their sons, and they feared they'd be slain, but it was not so. Unlike Ellared and Ellarin, slain or abandoned by the servants of Celegorm, Maglor takes pity upon Eros and Elrond and cherishes them, and love grew after between them as little might be thought. But Maglor's heart was sick and weary with the burden of the dreadful oath. Maglor is perhaps not the noblest of the seven sons, but he is the most compassionate in some ways. We'll see that. He doesn't have the strength of purpose of Maethros. The problem for Maethros is that he is a prince of such greatness that he cannot turn aside from the oath. And so he is the one who reunites his brothers and leads them to do evil. Celegorm and Curufin are so small in their way. They are so corrupted by the oath. All they can think of is of stealing Nargothrond and Luthien. Whereas Maethros, his greatness leads more and more to doom. Maglor, his heart, he loves these boys, and though it should not be the case that he'd become an adoptive father to them, he becomes a blessing to Elrond and Elros. Again, in the midst of all these curses, Eru is bringing out good. It's eucatastrophe again. Eärendil sees no hope left in Middle-earth, correctly. He'd already thought this, though. He and his wife go to Valinor. They'll seek it. They go with the Silmaril upon Eärendil's brow, and he is at the prow of Vingalot, and ever its light grew greater as they drew into the west. And the wise have said it was by reason of the power of the holy jewel they came to waters that no vessel save those of the Teleri had known. And they came to the enchanted isles, and escaped their enchantment. They came into the shadowy seas, and passed their shadows, and they looked upon Toloressia, the lonely isle, but tarried not, and at last they cast anchor in the bay of Eldamar. And the Teleri saw the coming of that ship, and were amazed, gazing from afar upon the light of the Silmaril, and it was very great. Then Earendil, first of living men, landed on the immortal shores, and he spoke there to Elwing and to those that were with him, and there were 3 mariners who had sailed all the seas beside him, Falathar, Erelont, and Erendir. Falathar must be thinking about sailing in the sea, were their names. And Earendil says, don't come on board, lest you wake the wrath of the Valar, but that peril I will take on myself alone, for the sake of the 2 kindreds. Elwing refuses this, and like Luthien, refuses to stand aside from the great quest, and leaps into the foam. And they say farewell to their companions, and were taken from them forever. And Earendil goes to the Calkyria, to Tyrion and to the Calkyria. No one's there. There's a great festival, much like when Morgoth and Ungoliant came in ages past. And there's a parallel there. The slaying of the trees was accompanied by a great festival and this quietness upon Tyrion upon Tuna. And so is the return of the light of the trees. But some few are there, and they go in haste to Valamar, and Earendil comes up. He entered into the streets of Tyrion, they were empty, and his heart was heavy, for he feared that some evil had come even to the blessed realm. He walked in the deserted ways of Tyrion, and the dust upon his raiments and his shoes was the dust of diamonds, and he shone and glistened as he climbed the long white stairs. And he called aloud in many tongues, both of elves and men, but there were none to answer him. Therefore he's turning back to the sea, and he hears a great voice, Hail Earendil, of mariners most renowned, the looked for that cometh at unawares, the longed for that cometh beyond hope. Hail Earendil, bearer of light before the sun and moon, eye of the Silmaril. Splendour of the children of earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning. That voice was the voice of Eonwë, herald of Manwë, and he came from Valamar and summoned Earendil to come before the powers of Arda. And so he goes and he makes plea. The Valar summon Ulmo. Hey Ulmo, why is this guy here? What's happening? And Earendil delivers the errand of the 2 kindreds. Pardon he asks the Noldor, pity for their great sorrows, mercy upon men and elves, and succour in their need, and his prayer was granted. They then have to deal with the issue of Earendil, and Mandos is like, surely, he is a mortal man, he can't come and live here. Ulmo makes the case, though, that Earendil is of the line of Hador. It basically is Earendil of the line of Hador or of the line of Finwë. Mandos says, well, sure, maybe there's a loophole, but the Noldor can't return hither because, so even so, he's a Noldor, so he can't come. Of course, the irony here is Elwing could do so because you could hardly say the doom of the Noldor was on her. But there we are. Manwë gives judgment. Ulmo pleads for the mortals. Mandos pleads for sort of, not in an evil or wicked way, but for cold justice. Surely these are the actual terms and conditions. He is the devil's advocate. In this matter, the power of doom is given to me. The peril that he ventured for love of the 2 kindred shall not fall upon Earendil, nor shall it fall upon Elwing his wife. But they shall not walk again ever among elves or men, and in this my decree concerning them, to Earendil and to Elwing and to their sons shall be given leave each to choose freely to which kindred their fate shall be joined, and under which kindred they shall be judged. Elwing, meanwhile, is befriending the Teleri, and they listened to her tales of Doriath and Gondolin and the griefs of Beleriand, and they were filled with pity and wonder. And there Earendil, returning, found her at the haven of the swans. So Earendil has gone to the Valar and pled his case. Elwing has made friends with the Teleri, and then they are told the decree. And Elwing, Aaron says, choose thou, for now I'm weary of the world. Elwing wants to be amongst the firstborn children, elves, because of Luthien, and for her sake, Earendil chose alike, though his heart was rather with the kindred of men and the people of his father. Then at the bidding of the Valar, Eonwë went to the shore of Aman, where the companions of Earendil still remained, awaiting tidings, and he took a boat, and the 3 mariners were set therein, and the Valar drove them away into the east with a great wind. So they are allowed to return. They have seen the blessed land, but they have not set foot upon it, so they're allowed to return. But the Valar take Vingalot, Foamflower, hallow it, and bore it away through Valinor to the utmost rim of the world. Now fair and marvellous was the vessel made, filled with a wavering flame, pure and bright, and Earendil the mariner sat at the helm, glistening with dust of elven gems, and the Silmaril was upon his brow. He journeyed in that ship even into the starless voids, but most often was he seen at morning and evening, glimmering in sunrise and sunset, as he came back to Valinor from voyages beyond the confines of the world. As one of the readers in our group said, this is, much like the early stories, there's an explanation of the myth here. This is the evening star, the morning star. Elwing doesn't want to go. She doesn't like the cold and pathless voids underneath the earth, and she loved rather the soil and the sweet winds that blow on sea and hill. Therefore was built for her a white tower looking northward, and thither at all times the seabirds of the earth repaired. And it said that Elwing learned the tongue of birds, who herself had once worn their shape, and they taught her the craft of flight, and her wings were of white and silver grey. And at times when Earendil returning drew near again to Arda, she'd fly to meet him, much like when she'd been rescued. Then the far-sighted among the elves that dwelt in the lonely isle would see her like a white bird, shining, rose-stained in the sunset, as she soared in joy to greet the coming of Vingalot to haven. Tolkien could write, couldn't he? Now, Vingalot goes in the sky, and when this new star was seen at the evening, Maethor spoke to Maglor his brother, and he said, "Surely that is a Silmaril that shines now in the west." And Maglor answered, "If it truly be the Silmaril which we saw cast into the sea, that rises again by the power of the Valar, then let us be glad. For its glory is seen now by many, and is yet secure from all evil." Then the elves looked up and despaired no longer, but Morgoth was filled with doubt. The remaining sons of Feanor, the good sons of Feanor, are glad they can no longer get the Silmaril. It's neither owned by anyone else, they say. It's secure from evil. Like, we can't get to it. We don't have to seek it. It can just be a sign of hope. They want good. They feel they are released at last, because Morgoth might have the other two, but they're not actually. They know they can't go and get it. So Morgoth doesn't think that he's doomed, though. He thinks he's estranged the Noldor from the Lords of the West. He thinks he's got very strong armies. But the host of Valar prepares for battle, and beneath their white banners march the Vanyar, the people of Ingwe, and those also of the Noldor who never departed from Valinor, whose leader was Finarfin, the son of Finwë, father of Finrod and Galadriel. Few of the Teleri were willing to go to war, for they remembered the slaying at the Swanhaven, the rape of their ships, but they hearkened to Elwing, who was the daughter of Dior Elokiel and came of their own kindred, and they sent mariners enough to sail the ships that bore the host of Valinor east over the sea. Yet they stayed aboard their vessels, and none of them set foot upon the hitherlands. We now actually get, as I say, a 50-year period of the War of Wrath, which and the conclusion of that, which you'd think, that'd be lots of detail, but the point is it's not the main story anymore. There are other details we know. I think his name's Ingwanian, the son of Ingwe. We do hear of another Vanyar who leads the armies. This is the only thing the Vanyar do more or less in the entire books, other than a few marriages. What they do, though, is lead the host of the West. They are the great elves of light who have ever dwelt high beyond Calciria, not upon Tirion, with the Noldor where Finarfin is king, but they've always dwelt amongst the Valar themselves. And you can imagine, though it's never said explicitly, what glory and light must be in their faces. Little is said in any tale of the march of the host of the Valar to the north of Middle-earth, for among them were none of those elves who had dwelt and suffered in the Hitherland, so you don't know about their march. Tidings of these things were only learnt afterward. But at the last, the might of the Valar came up out of the west. The challenge of the trumpets of Eonwë filled the sky, and Beleriand was ablaze with the glory of their arms. For the hosts of the Valar were arrayed in forms young and fair and terrible, and the mountains rang beneath their feet. The meeting of the hosts of the west and of the north is named the Great Battle and the War of Wrath. And the hosts of the Valar were arrayed in forms fair and terrible. And Beleriand was ablaze with the glory of their arms, for the host of the Valar came up out of the west, and the challenge of the trumpet of So we know that this is the end. The great battle comes before the whole power of the throne of Morgoth. Anfalgneith can't contain it. He sends out everything, but it availed Morgoth not. The Balrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid themselves in caverns inaccessible at the roots of the earth. Well, that's relevant, isn't it? The uncounted legions of the Orcs perished like straw in a great fire. Few remained to trouble the world for long years after, and such few as were left of the three heroes of the elf friends, fathers of men, fought upon the part of the Valar, and they were avenged in those days for Baragund and Barahir, Galdor and Gundor, Huor and Hurin, and many others of their lords. But a great part of the sons of men, whether of the people of Uldor or others new come out of the east, marched with the enemy, and the elves do not forget it. Something only clocked and checked up on was that the people of Bor, who redeem the Easterlings, who are loyal to Maethros, and who salvage some small glory for their people out of the Nirnieth, they're basically eliminated. That's why they're never mentioned again. Morgoth finally, despairing, sends forth his winged dragons that had not before been seen. And so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that terrible fleet, the host of the Valar was driven back, for the coming of the dragons was with great thunder and lightning and a tempest of fire. I suppose it's impossible. You don't think that actually the Valar could be defeated if they wanted to fight Morgoth here. But their host and their positions, and some few of them are driven back by this mighty horde of dragons that has never been seen before. But Earendil came shining with white flame, and about Vingalot were gathered all the great birds of heaven, and Thorondor was their captain, and there was battle in the air all the day and through a dark night of doubt. Before the rising of the sun, Earendil threw Ancalagon the Black, slew him, and cast him from his sky. And he fell upon the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. He must be, there's a debate about this, he must be larger than the ordinary dragon, because he's so big that he can destroy Thangorodrim. But perhaps not actually, the size of a battleship, I don't know. All the pits of Morgoth are destroyed as the hosts of the Valar prevail. The dragons are mostly destroyed. Some, obviously, we know, go off into the east, like Smaug. Morgoth, though he may not have been born here, he may have been born later. Morgoth stood at last at bay and yet unvaliant. Bad guys don't get to have glorious deaths in Middle-earth, on the whole, because there is such a corruption that comes from this that it renders, one virtue goes and the next goes. There's a domino principle. People who are corrupt in some way can have glorious ends, noble ends, and you see this actually with some of the leaders of the Haradrim and Easterlings who, abandoned by the orcs, stand at bay, refuse to surrender, and fight gloriously at the Pelennor and beyond, because they may be wicked in some ways, but they are still men. They haven't been so utterly corrupted as to become less than. And Morgoth flees to the deepest of his mines, but is dragged out by a chain, his old chain Anganor. His crown is broken and turned into a collar for his neck, and the Silmarils are taken, and Eonwy takes them. Thus then was made of the power of Angband in the north. It's an interesting thing to think, Morgoth, the more powerful he theoretically becomes, the more corrupt he becomes, the more he masters outside himself, the less he is himself a master of himself. And the more he is cowardly. He goes forth to fight Fingolfin, but he's scared of it and is wounded. Gwyndor comes and he quails and hides, even though this is exactly his plan. And slaves are brought forth. They looked upon a world that was changed, for so great was the fury of the adversaries, the northern regions are changed forever. And everything is being destroyed and collapsing in this cataclysm. In fact, the inward sea upon which Cuivianen had stood is drained out, and because of this, that's where Mordor and Khand and places in the east that wouldn't be in the First Age maps, they rise. Eonwe says to the elves of Beleriand to depart from Middle-earth, but Maethros and Maglor were not heartened, and they prepared they now with weariness and loathing to attempt in despair the fulfilment of their oath. They would have given battle for the Silmarils were they withheld, even against the victorious host of Valinor, even though they stood alone against all the world. Here's the thing, Maethros and Maglor are not utterly corrupted. This is the problem. Their goodness and greatness, bound by an oath of great power, means that they do have great courage. It's just courage that is futile and insane and leads to evil. They bid Eonwe yield the jewels. Eonwe answers that the right to the work of their father, which the sons of Feanor formerly possessed, are now perished because of their many and merciless deeds, being blinded by their oath, and most of all because of their slayings of Dior and the assault upon the havens. The light of the Silmarils should go now into the west, whence it came in the beginning, and to Valinor must Maethros and Maglor return, and there abide the judgment of the Valar, by whose decree alone would Eonwe yield the jewels from his charge. Then Maglor desired indeed to submit, for his heart was sorrowful when he said, the oath says not that we may not bide our time, and it may be that Valinor shall all be forgiven and forgot, and we shall come into our own in peace. He's seeking a loophole. Maethros, who is greater than Maglor and therefore more bound, answers if they return to Aman, but the favour of the Valar were withheld from them, their oath would still remain, but its fulfilment be beyond all hope. And he said, who can tell to what dreadful doom we shall come if we disobey the powers in their own land or purpose ever to bring war again into their holy realm? Maglor holds back. If Manwë and Vardar themselves deny the fulfilment of an oath to which we named him witness, is it not made void? They've said to come home. Surely that means we're released. The slacker comedy version of these characters, I'm suddenly struck by, is Bartleby and Loki and Dogma. Maethros answered, but how shall our voices reach to Ilúvatar beyond the circles of the world? And by Ilúvatar we swore in our madness, and called the everlasting darkness upon us if we kept not our word. Who shall release us? We said that we should be destroyed and go to hell, basically, if there were a hell, and be swallowed up entirely if we don't hold to our oath. What is worse, one more attempt to fulfil the deed, or the everlasting darkness? If none can release us, said Maglor, then indeed the everlasting darkness should be our lot, whether we keep our oath or break it. But less evil shall we do in the breaking. Maglor perhaps is right, but Maethros is unyielding, and they go and they steal the Silmarils from Eonwë. They don't kill anyone in doing so. The camp was raised against them. They're prepared to die defending until the last. But Eonwë would not permit the slaying of the sons of Fëanor, and departing on foot they fled away. Each of them took to himself a Silmaril, for they said, since one is lost to us, but two remain, we two alone of our brothers, so it's plain that fate would have us share the heirlooms of our father. But the jewel burned the hand of Maethros in pain unbearable, and he perceived that it was as Eonwë had said, and his right thereto had become void, and the oath was vain, and he throws himself into a chasm of fire, and the Silmaril he bore was borne into the bosom of the earth. And it told of Maglor he could not endure the pain either. He cast it into the sea, and thereafter he wanders upon the shore, singing in pain and regret beside the waves. For Maglor was mighty among the singers of old, named only after Daeron of Doriath, but he came never back among the people of the elves, and thus it came to pass the Silmarils found their long homes, and one in the airs of heaven, and one in the fires of the heart of the world, and one in the deep waters. In those days there is a great building, and everyone goes back. The joy and victory is diminished, for they go without the Silmarils. But yet not all the Ardalier were willing to forsake the hitherlands. So Círdan the shipwright, Celeborn of Doriath, with Galadriel his wife, Gil-galad the high king, and with him Elrond half-elven, who chose to be numbered among elves, but Elros chose to abide with men. And from their brethren alone have come men among men the blood of the firstborn, and a strain of the spirits divine that were before Arda. For they were the sons of Elwyn, Dior's daughter, Lúthien's son, child of Thingol and Melian, and Earendil, their father, was the son of Idril Celebrind, Turgon's daughter of Gondolin. Morgoth is cast outside the doors of night. A guard is set over on those walls, and Earendil keeps watch upon the ramparts of the sky in Vingalot. Yet the lies that Melkor the mighty and the accursed, Morgoth Bauglir, the power of terror and of hate, sowed in the hearts of men, sowed in the hearts of elves and men, that's the power of terror and hate, sowed in the hearts of elves and men, are a seed that does not die and cannot be destroyed, and ever and anon it sprouts anew and will bear dark fruit even to the latest days. Well, actually, there's a point to return to about Morgoth we'll return to later, next time, but that is more than enough for now. These 3 chapters have in them probably 9 or 10 chapters worth of content. Really, at least they could all be doubled up, I think, to 6, or they could all be doubled in length. It's an incredibly powerful series of things. Some of it feels very compressed. The Fall of Gondolin feels very compressed. Some of it is very satisfying. I think the Voyage of Earendil and the War of Roth is very well accomplished. And the arcs of Maethros and Maglor through this period are very, very powerful. The final story of Beren and Lúthien is very powerful. It's a very, very successful set, but one can wish for more. There are fragments. The Wanderings of Húrin are a fragment for what would happen also in that chapter. And you can look to the layers for more detail on the Fall of Gondolin and things like that. But anyway, that is the end of that. It's we finished the Quenta in flame and in destruction and in the sinking of the old world that we've known. Now we will head in the second and third age to Númenor and to Eriador and to the south. That is my thoughts. If you've got thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Share them in the comments, and I will see you next time.